I think scalability is less critical in the very earliest stages, obviously, where you're just trying to figure out what resonates with the consumer, with a segment and audience. And then you can say, great, how do I find more of them?
I recently sat with Kevin Bennett, who is the co-founder and CEO at Further, an early-stage startup in the real estate/fintech category. Prior to Further, Kevin founded and sold a technology business called HomeZen, which was acquired by Breakout Capital. And then following that exit, Kevin took on the role of CEO at Caribou in 2018, which he built to a $1 billion valuation. Kevin's perhaps best known for his time there at Caribou. I invited Kevin on the show because of his early-stage fintech lending background. He's a strategist and applies structured frameworks to problems in the context of startups. If you're a fintech founder, I think you'll enjoy hearing how Kevin thinks about distribution as an early-stage fintech lending founder. Let's get into the conversation. Kevin, good morning. Thanks again for joining us on the podcast.
Carlos, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And I kind of wanted to start with your take on, in the very early days, when you think about a CEO's attention on product or distribution or potentially other stuff, like how do you think about that, given you're now in the early days of another venture?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. It's whack-a-mole, and you just have to know what mole you're trying to whack, as it were. So definitely spot on that it's product and distribution. You have to have a product that's table stakes. Having products like having a really nice car, having distributions like roads. If you don't have any roads, the car doesn't go anywhere, right? And so success isn't just product, it's product and distribution. And so sometimes you'll hear folks say, that first-time founders focus on product, second-time founders focus on distribution, right? It's that holistic view of you kind of need both, but I think oftentimes founders, especially at the early stage, will think that product is the ball game. And it's a big piece of that. You can have product-led growth and all of that, but distribution is a big part of it. And so taking distribution as seriously as you take product is really critical and really important. And I think some of the lessons from product very much apply to distribution, right?
Mm-hmm.
So think about the risk of overweighting auction value. It is definitely true when you're early. There are lots of hypotheses you're trying to test. So lots of potential ways things could go right. As an entrepreneur, pretty optimistic. Lots of ways things could go right, and you want to test all those. But I think it is the process of testing those, getting the answers, validating or invalidating, and then necessarily winnowing those down.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that you're going to have, 50 different versions of the product that work. You're going to have one that works.
Right.
Distribution looks surprisingly like that. It even if counterintuitive, right? Because everyone wants to be diversified, but the reality is it's much more likely that you have a distribution channel that works early and actually helps your product take off, rather than 3 or 4 that all of a sudden go to the moon at the same time.
Right.
Then you have a different problem, which is concentration risk,
Sure.
right? So something's worked, all of a sudden it's driving a ton of growth, you double down on it because it works and growth wins. And then you get to figure out how to diversify and what that looks like.
So in the really early days, and I kind of see this with I'm running a services business now, so I'm playing with that same challenge, product with distribution. Where do I spend my time? And I kind of boiled it down, at least for me, 3 buckets. I can find an arbitrage in paid media somewhere. Effectively underpriced attention. It used to be Facebook, Google, like back in the day. I can build a brand, i.e. I can put content out there, I can speak, I can do LinkedIn, whatever, and hope people find me and generate inbound. Or I can just go through my network, people that already know me, trust me. So I break it down into kind of those 3 buckets. From a consumer founder angle, is it the same 3 buckets? Do you categorize things differently? And kind of how do you stack rank for lending products? Is it arbitrages? Is it brand? Is it something else? Where does your mind go early days of scaling a company?
Yeah, right question. So follow-up question for you, which is what's worked best?
Oh, for me right now, I'm brand, almost entirely brand. I haven't found all that many arbitrages. I'm starting to see some sign of life in channels like X. Weirdly, I didn't expect that to be the case, but I'm starting to run experiments and I'm starting to see signs of life there. But I'm predominantly network and brand right now. But my suspicion is for consumer arbitraging media, at least finding one arb somewhere that kind of works and generates ROI is probably the place where I would go. But I don't know if that plays out in practice.
Yeah, I mean, so a couple quick thoughts. One, just to riff on kind of what you just mentioned. I think the right formula is probably reserving some percentage of resources for experimentation. Just stuff that's, now you don't necessarily have a deep investment budget for it, but you just test it out and see what works. And sometimes things pop, sometimes they don't. Now, you've got to be willing to kill those very quickly, right? They're just kind of one-off experiments, but sometimes you get some signal pretty quickly, and spending some small amount of time on that to test is good. Look, my focus and obviously marketing is quite broad, everything from brand to the kind of data analytics and data science and marketing. But direct acquisition is the focus. And when you're an early stage startup, you have to acquire customers today, right? It's not having to make an investment, maybe in 18 months that pays off, is just a ludicrous value proposition as a founder. Like at the early stage, like it's as good as not having customers. And so I think one, I don't think many folks fall in this trap, but really over focusing on brand early is just your customers will tell you brand, I think, becomes much more of a bottoms up value proposition early than top down. You test messages, segments, audiences, all that. Folks will tell you what works, right? They'll tell you what they're responding to, and that's how you almost bottom up build the brand and see what we were. And then there's certainly over time you can do the kind of top down kind of stuff, but it's really, it's impossible to be too close to your customer. And part of what bottom up brand building does is it keeps you close to the customer. It ties you to the mast, right? It's effectively committing yourself to being right there with the customer. And if you go with top down brand building, you can just get way in your own head, kind of in the clouds, like on whiteboards, which is fine,
Sure.
but that can get real far from the customer. And that's true of product, it's true of channel as well. And so I think really staying as close as possible to the customer and iterating very tightly.
Yeah.
You want the customer as close to in the room with you as possible. And direct acquisition allows you to do that.
So when you say staying close to the customer, do you mean buying media and watching closely the behavior, how folks react to that paid media, or is it interviews and market research? Is it both? Like, how do you think about that problem?
So it's a mix, right? So I certainly think about product and positioning of the product as much more being able to have a conversation, right? What resonates? Why would you react to X versus Y? Clickable prototypes, all those kind of things, right? When you think about channels, though, seeing two things. One is what messaging is working top of funnel, obviously, but also who's converting through the funnel. And so the reality is, like, you're often playing the game in early tests. You have to start top of funnel just because the end's small enough that that's the only way you can get any signal. But you quickly want to get to bottom of funnel because the important metric isn't who's knocking on the door. It's actually who's staying for dinner, right? As it were. And so you need to get your real high value customers because not all leads are equally valuable.
Got it.
And so and that's why understanding segments really matters a ton. Obviously, with lending and credit businesses, this is true. Income, credit, like all those things. And so I don't think, for example, I've always been skeptical of things like SEO in a credit and lending business. It makes a ton of sense early because you're not trying to attract everyone generally. You're usually trying to attract a very specific segment and persona. And so it's about where does that specific segment persona live? So, for example, you could test a channel that generally, quote unquote, works, or looks like it's working. It's a bit of a mirage. Lots of people coming in, but it turns out the customers you want to convert are converting. Some other customers trying to convert, and that doesn't work. Right. So I think it's really about learning, digging into the data, understanding what segments are working or not working, and iterating quickly. Makes a ton of sense.
So, look, what I'm imagining here is you're running a bunch of experiments across a number of channels. You're watching closely both on throughput rate, CAC, but importantly, who's actually transacting. What are the profiles of those users? I imagine you're talking to some of those users. And then you're going back to the top of funnel in every channel and saying, how do I get more of those folks that closed? And how do I get less of these folks that either were declined or weren't a good fit or whatever? Is that the feedback loop you're describing?
I think that's right. And to qualify channels as well as you can early on. There are some channels that will obviously not work if you just look at the profile of customer you need. For example, profile X has a credit profile of 580 to 640, but I need 680 plus. Well, that channel is not going to work for you.
Yeah.
Right. It just definitionally not going to work. Spend zero time on it. But know the questions to ask to validate or qualify the channel up front.
Got
You're not spending any time on channels. You're not doing tests to find that out when you actually could have found it out by asking ChatGPT on the front end.
Sure.
I think that's an obvious example, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's right. The other thing is cycle time's the number one metric.
Talk more about that. Why is that so important?
Speed kills, right? In a world of finite resources, like it's all about how quickly can you learn. So in some ways, like the TLDR on something like lean startup is simply cycle time. You're optimizing for validating learnings as quickly as possible.
And cycle time, I think you're saying I have an idea today. I wanted to deploy cash against that idea. How many days does it take until I know whether or not it worked? Is that basically it?
How quickly can you get to yes, no, maybe? And if maybe is simply overtime, how much time, extra time you get to maybe to make it a yes or a no?
When I hear that one, I think I go like paid search, paid social get pretty high. I can find Meta and Google and deploy cash and build a career. I can do that in 24 hours. And if I'm in a lending business, maybe in 2 weeks or 1 week, I know, because there's a little bit of lag from buying media to actually closing the deals. And then I start thinking, oh, direct mail, not as sexy, longer cycle time, got to build a list, got to get the stuff out. And then I think affiliate, I could go either way. If I have close relationships at some of these places and I can get in quickly, I like it. If they have no idea who I am and it's going to take me 6 months to close a partnership, I hate it, right? So like, is that more, would you stack rank it about the same, or would you think about it differently?
So I think you're onto something really important, which is it's really important to understand, are you trying to learn or are you trying to scale? So those are two different things. If I'm just trying to learn, maybe I go to Meta because I can test a bunch of different things and learn. I can learn about audiences and messages and all those things, right? Or a Meta type thing.
Yep.
If I'm trying to scale, maybe I go to direct mail, to your point. Cycle time's longer, but cycle time's less valuable when trying to scale. I'm talking about you're just trying to get to like long-term growth or maybe diversification,
Right.
whatever that looks like. So I think it depends on what you're optimizing for in that phase of the company. And often it's learning at the very earliest stage. Then it's okay, we found this segment messaging. What are the best channels for this audience, for this, message, et cetera. And then testing those, getting some that work, and then, from there. Yeah.
I want to put in a word here by our sponsor for today's episode, which is Spinwheel. You'll find them at spinwheel.io. They help you streamline your lending application pages with 2 fields. So if you're anything like us, friction on application pages makes you nauseous. It makes your CACs go up. It makes your volumes drop. It makes your CFO and CEO say mean things. The trouble is, it isn't easy to fix. Your product and engineering is probably busy. We get it. Spinwheel's API streamlines a lending application form with just a phone number and a birth date. Like magic. But really, it's a smart tech. Then you'll get a 20 to 30% lift in your application rate. Additionally, they can give you real-time, verified customer credit data and seamless payment processing, which can help you serve customers beyond the initial application. To see a demo, click on the link in the show notes to chat with their head of growth and see this thing in action.
I think scalability is less critical in the very earliest stages, obviously, where you're just trying to figure out what resonates with the consumer, with a segment and audience. And then you can say, great, how do I find more of them? You mentioned something earlier that also reminded me of something I read that really resonated with me, which was startups are often built by bootstrapping themselves on someone else's ecosystem. So it's very rare that the growth pattern from 0 to 1 on a startup looks like 4 or 5 channels equally distributed that all grow at the same time, right? It's much more likely that something breaks through. Something can be word of mouth, right, in the most organic way, or it can simply be, hey, there's an existing ecosystem that has been built out that I can kind of bootstrap myself to that serves me up to an entire universe of people in a way that can be targeted, or I can select into the right segment and really grow from there. That's much more likely to be the case. And so thinking about broadly about the ecosystem, the context, who are the players, who are the adjacent players, who are the potential partners, what does that look like? I think that can be really important, right? So maybe it's a Credit Karma type ecosystem, right? Something like that. Maybe it's simply just a strategic partner and hitting the ecosystem at the right point for that partner that can really help make your business, right? In a more strategic way where it's less affiliate driven. But either way, I think having hypotheses about your kind of top options and opportunities, and then being really focused. I mean, early stage, but honestly, I don't know. I mean, even late stage, I kind of never count higher than three. There are never more than three things that matter. It's very
Right.
rare there can be more than three channels that matter to your business.
And what stage of business are you thinking? Like even like post $100 million valuation, like 3 channels is probably still the mix.
Probably. I mean, it erodes over time, right? It's certainly it's 100% true early on in the early days, and then it becomes slightly less true. But I really wondered, haven't thought very deeply about it, honestly. But when you get late stage, it's probably still pretty true. That's not to say you're not making bets and trying to test other things, but you probably aren't more than three channels that matter to your business. I mean, almost ever, honestly. Like, it's probably that, that there are three that are really working. There are probably few businesses that have five or six channels that are completely crushing it, but I'm skeptical for the most part.
Yeah, I don't see a lot of those just in practice across like folks I talk to in the industry. You mentioned earlier, um, kind of back to the idea of experimenting and looking for a breakthrough channel. How, like in the data, when you're looking at the stuff, how do you tell the difference between kind of a modest winner and a breakthrough? Like, does the breakthrough, is it like so much better than everything else and it slaps you in the face, or is it more nuanced than that? Like, how do you know when you're onto something?
It is easy to tell if a channel has real potential. It's easy to tell if it will be a double. It's hard to tell if it will be a grand slam sometimes. It depends how organic, how much work needs to go into it, right, et
Mhm.
cetera. But I think, it's fairly easy to say, hey, I can look at these metrics and say if we improve it slightly here, this way or that way, and generally it's healthy. But the reality is, like, when you're refining a channel, you're usually not going to improve it by orders of magnitude. You're going to optimize it, right? Optimizing channels 10, 20%, maybe
Yep.
30%. It's not 500%. So the fundamentals of the channel need to be there.
Mhm.
Right. And then you can say, or there's a segment, which is, hey, the channel, I can look at the channel broadly and say it doesn't work, but this 20 or 30% is beautiful. And then the question is, how much scale can you do at 20 or
Got it.
30%? What do you learn? But, but I think that, when you think about like a multi-phased approach with a partner, I think I think folks in startup land tend to be optimistic, as they should. Like, optimists create the future, but also there are times to try and be deeply pessimistic around hope is
Mhm.
not a strategy, right? But so I think that's certainly true for the double. I don't think that's true getting from a double to a home run or a grand slam. I actually think that can just be work over time helps it get there.
Got it.
Sometimes it's a joint product agenda where they launch a new product that helps it be an even better fit. Sometimes there's a new tool they're rolling out. So I think that this again goes to the place where spend the time with those players, right? If you have a double that could be a home run, it's a much better investment than taking a 1 in 100 shot at five other channels.
Yeah, I mean, and that kind of gets to the concept of like, when do you triple down on a channel versus walk away? Like, what are what are some things that tell you it's time to walk away from a bet?
Well, I would think about a framework when evaluating channels that says basically, is there a strong segment fit, right? So the credit score is an easy one, right? If you're going
Mhm.
standard credit score metrics, like it's a null set or it's a real thin overlap. The populations don't really overlap, right? So that's an exit ramp there. Like, do not ask any other questions. Nothing else matters. There's none. Then you get to, okay, say there is an overlap. Is the value exchange resonating? Are people engaging at the rate you need them to engage to have a successful channel? Now, maybe they're dropping off somewhere in the funnel. You can
Yeah.
research that, but there's a fun.
So here you're talking like initial click through rate, something like that is kind of what you're looking at. Okay.
Mhm. And maybe they drop off mid funnel or at the end, and you can find
Mm.
out why. I remember I had a friend who ran growth at I'd say last generation kind of fintech. And when he took it over, everyone was abandoning at the very end. Great funnel till the very end, everyone abandoned. And it turned out they just got nervous. I'd say to find a way to reassure people, but the channel was good, right? The general people were getting through, but they just at the end were getting nervous. So you can solve that problem,
Mm.
generally speaking. So is it resonating? And then the next one is, can you tell a reasonable story about getting to viable economics? be a great channel if the CAC's twice as high as it needs to be. Like,
Yeah.
it's hard. Now, if it's 20% higher, 30% higher, fine. If it's not, if there are ways to kind of really refine the targeting, sure. But you just got to be able to tell a story of how you get from here to there.
So like, what would you have to believe to be excited about the channel, essentially?
Yeah, you know, the old joke about losing money on every transaction, making it up in a volume rate doesn't work, right?
I mean, is that effectively like breaking down every single step of the funnel from that initial response to the transaction and seeing realistically how much can I move this piece and that piece, and like there's a bunch of compounding, but is that the math we're talking about?
Yeah, and I think it gets increasingly important when it's a transactional business, right? Because you're that one transaction is critical, or if the majority of it's based on a transaction, or there may be, you know, kind of other derivative product. But if you're really trying to get someone to convert through a single funnel to get to an end, and that's really driving it, then that funnel is very important to you. So I think that's right. There's this bonus criteria as well, right? So is there a segment fit? Is the value exchange resonating? And can you get to viable economics, right? Those are the three obvious ones. The one that I think sounds obvious, but I think can be less obvious, or is not as obvious as the first three, is this strategic for both parties? If it's not, right? So put the other hat on, right? You're your partner. Is this strategic, and is this a good partnership for them? Either because it's core to their strategy, the economics work for it. If not, you're on borrowed time. At some point, they're going to figure that out, right? And so ultimately, you want partnerships where everyone can win. And if the partnership is premised on, let me just see if I can convince someone of something that isn't true, that's not going to work.
I mean, so that's specifically strategic partnerships, affiliates, that kind of that category. I assume you're not talking about Meta, Google, because they're in the business of selling media. Like that's irrelevant, right? It's more in strategic partnerships, I think, where that becomes relevant.
Even affiliates, say they're working there, you're convincing them to enter a new category, right? Or there's something they should be doing more of than they're doing, right? So by definition, as a startup, you're asking a partner to change something they're doing because they weren't doing it before, or they weren't doing it with you before, whatever. And there's an implicit promise, which is you will be better off if you work with us. You should believe that's true.
Like with a very high level of conviction, right?
But also they will be better off because if they realize they're not better off, then you have a problem.
Gotcha.
So just thinking like, you know, it's kind of enlightened self-interest in some ways, but understanding it, you know, it needs to work for everyone.
Again, put yourself in the shoes of a founder that maybe has a little like encouraged by a product, maybe has some early pilots, wants to put those bets, those experiments out there that you talked about. How would you stack rank the following channels? Like if we said it's affiliates, it's paid search, paid social, direct mail, and maybe we just put a bucket of like offline media, like other stuff, right? Like traditional TV, radio, print, that sort of stuff. Like how would you stack rank priority of running experiments across those?
I'll take a step back and try and work on a framework for it because I think it's most useful, which is how well is it resonating? So for any channel, they're not going to equally resonate. Numbers aren't going to be exactly the same. So what's the strength of the data you're seeing? What's the scalability of the channel? What do the economics look like? And how stable is the partnership? And I guess the last one, going back to the earlier conversation, is how strategic is it for each party? How invested are they? Often if someone can turn you on easily, they can turn you off easily, right? So understanding what that could look like. Is it a moat? Is it really become, and that gets to revenue quality, right? The revenue multiple, you know, because some folks who maybe earlier in their career won't necessarily know that the multiple on revenue can depend on the channel.
So the sturdier it's perceived, the higher the multiple.
The sturdier, the more strategic.
Yeah.
Yes, for sure.
Versus if you're just plugged into Meta, everyone knows that's dynamic. That could change overnight and you could get booted, right? Okay.
Yeah. And so you have to look at growth rate versus stability. Maybe something can move quickly and is moving quickly in the right direction. Now, it could move in the wrong direction, but it's parabolic, and so people are really excited about it. Or it could be much steadier and stickier. You know, strategic partnerships can be that way, right? They take longer to get off the ground often, but they can be really powerful over time. And so I think about kind of a phase by time approach, which are, where can I learn the quickest? Where can I actually start to get the right feedback? What can start to be scalable, right? Affiliates can be really positive there, right? In terms of what works. And then overlaying some amount of time on the longer term partnerships, which are highly valuable if they pay off in the end, but maybe they take a year, 2, 3 years even to pay off, right? So when you're looking at kind of as a startup, I always kind of marvel at the folks who, and it's great if it works. I mean, you really are, swinging for the fences. Say, well, it's just a big partner, strategic partner only strategy. And if that lands and it lands quickly, it's great. It tends to be the case that large organizations move slowly. And so if that's not something they know how to do, and that gets to the partnership side as well, how good is the company at partner is a very relevant. If you're going to be the first partner they've ever worked with, buckle up. It's going to take a long time, if ever, right? If this is something they do every Tuesday, like they add, great, right? Much easier path. So the more you can really understand the other side of the table, the other party, and what their competency is, what their motivation is, what their economics are, it generally helps you write a much better strategy.
I love it. These are terrific frameworks. I think I'm going to riff on some of these myself and see if I can add to them. But Kevin, thanks for coming in, taking the time. I hope fintech founders that are listening today got a lot of value from your experience and how you think about these problems. Just I guess, but before we break, what are you up to now, and kind of where can folks find you if they want to learn more about your current venture?
Yeah. So after taking 6 months off with our first baby after building Caribou, I'm back at it with Further. And so Further is a platform that its goal is to empower aspiring homeowners to help them afford and understand what they can afford when it comes to buying their first home. And so home affordability is at just a really, in a really tough situation. Your average first time buyer is now 38 years old. Home values have increased 50% in the last 5 years. And we have a lot of structural challenges when it comes to home buying. And so much more complicated, much more expensive than it was before. And we're taking a fragmented data ecosystem and a lot of fragmentation in the experience and trying to create kind of the one-stop shop for aspiring home buyers to help them navigate the process.
I love it. So you couldn't resist coming back to fintech. You had the option to take a step out, and you came back. So
Yeah, it may be an addiction or a disease or whatnot, but look, I think when you want to have an impact on people's lives, commerce and economics are just so fundamental to everyone's lives and their aspirations and what they're trying to achieve that it's really just a great part of the economy and ecosystem to have a huge impact on consumers. If you kind of in my world, and I'm excited to work on it again with Further.
awesome. Well, I will be following your social media. I'll be keeping an eye on what you're up to. Um, no doubt, a lot of people from your network are watching this closely. So, Kevin, thanks again for taking the time with us today, and look forward to doing this again in the future sometime.
Carlos, I enjoyed it. Thanks so much.